Look at this for a second. Spain had a global empire, a mountain of silver, and the kind of power other nations dreamed about. And still, it kept slamming into payment crises again and again. The crazy part is that the problem was not that Spain had no money. The problem was that it had money coming in so fast, so suddenly, and from so far away that it broke the system that was supposed to hold the empire together. To understand how that happens, you have to go back to the 16th century, when Spain was at the center of the world. Under Philip II, the Spanish Empire reached its greatest power, extent, and influence. This was not a small regional kingdom anymore. It was the giant on the map, the state that tried to hold Europe, the Atlantic, and parts of the Americas together at the same time. And then came the treasure. In 1545, Potosí was discovered in what is now Bolivia, and it would become one of the richest silver mines in human history. The Library of Congress notes that during its most prolific period, Potosí produced almost half of the silver in circulation globally, and by some estimates, nearly 20% of all known silver produced over 265 years. That is not a mine. That is an economic earthquake. Here is the twist. That silver did not just sit there making Spain richer. It moved. It crossed oceans. It passed through ports, merchants, wars, and empires. Some of it fed Europe's growing money supply. Some of it even ended up in China, where demand for silver was enormous. One Library of Congress source says roughly a quarter of all American silver mined from the 1500s to the early 1800s wound up in China. And that silver trade had huge consequences for other parts of the world too. And that is where the dream started to rot from the inside. More silver sounds like more wealth, but when the money supply grows faster than the amount of real goods a country can produce, prices rise. That is exactly what happened in Spain. Britannica says American silver and gold were enough to trigger a price revolution there, with costs in some regions multiplying by 3 to 5 during the 16th century. Think about what that means in real life. Bread gets pricier, tools get pricier, cloth gets pricier, soldiers get pricier, ships get pricier, imports get pricier. And because Spain's own government wanted to keep bullion from leaving the kingdom, the country still became a magnet for outside products, because high prices at home made Spain a great market for foreign goods. In other words, treasure came in, but so did inflation, dependency, and a growing bill for everything.
Philip II then did what many empires do when they feel powerful. He spent like the future was guaranteed. He fought in the Netherlands, against England, and in France. Britannica says the Armada campaign alone was said to have cost 10 million ducats, and the continuing wars cost even more. Silver shipments helped, but Britannica makes it clear that silver was only about a quarter of Philip's annual revenues. The rest had to come from taxes and loans tied to future income. That is the trap. When a government starts living on borrowed money and future treasure, it can look strong right up until the day the cash stops arriving on time. Philip II's reign is famous for repeated payment stops. Modern economic historians describe him as the first serial defaulter in history, with 4 major suspensions of payments during his reign. And across the wider Habsburg story, Spain would eventually rack up many more defaults, becoming notorious for repeated failures to honor its debts. The most important part is that these crises were not just random panic, they were tied to timing. The silver flow was uneven. Historians note that Potosí's production actually fell between 1550 and 1570, then rose sharply in 1572 and hit a peak in 1592. At the same time, Spain was fighting major wars and dealing with thin silver remittances in the early 1570s. So the empire kept acting like a machine that expected treasure to show up on schedule, even when the mine and the wars were not cooperating. And when the money did not arrive fast enough, the whole system shook. A 2010 Cambridge study on Philip II's debts argues that the king's debts were actually sustainable in the long run, but that the defaults reflected short-term liquidity crises, not a simple story of total collapse. That matters because it means Spain did not fail because it had no income at all. It failed because its income was badly timed, badly distributed, and tied to a state that kept reaching for more than it could safely carry. There was another poison in the mix too. The burden did not fall evenly. Britannica says Castile got the biggest share of the wealth from New World silver, but also suffered the worst consequences when Mexico and Peru became more self-sufficient. Bullion imports dropped, trade with Europe became badly unbalanced, and taxation fell heavily on Castile. So the place that powered the empire also paid the highest price for it. And when a state squeezes harder to pay its bills, people feel it everywhere. Britannica notes that Spanish industry declined in the 16th century, in part because of crown taxes that pushed people toward foreign goods. That is the silent damage of easy money. It can make a country spend more, produce less, and rely more on outsiders just to keep daily life moving.
This is why Spain's silver shock mattered far beyond Spain. Britannica says price rises followed in other countries too, largely because Spanish bullion was moving through Europe. The same source says the bullion helped create a money economy and gave a huge push to the broader commercial revolution. So what started as a Spanish treasure boom ended up helping rewire the whole European economy. But even that was not the end of the story, because global silver demand kept pulling the metal in different directions. The Cambridge article on China and the Spanish Empire argues that Ming China's demand for silver had a fundamental impact on Spain's rise and decline. In that view, China's appetite for silver helped keep mining profits high for a time. But when those profits weakened, Spain's financial stress deepened too. The empire was now tied to a global market it could not fully control. So the real lesson is not Spain had too little treasure. It is that treasure is not the same thing as strength. Spain had silver, but it also had war, debt, inflation, uneven taxes, foreign dependence, and a state built to spend faster than it could adapt. That is how a superpower can look unbeatable on the outside and still keep cracking under the surface. By the end of Philip II's reign, Spain was still the greatest power in Europe, but the foundation under that greatness had started to split. The empire had gambled its prosperity and its American treasure on dominance across Europe, and although it survived damaged. The silver did not save Spain, it exposed it. And that is the most brutal part of this story. The same silver that made Spain look unstoppable helped create the inflation, debt pressure, and global distortions that slowly hollowed it out. The empire did not collapse because it was poor. It struggled because it was rich in the worst possible way. Rich enough to believe the flow would never stop.